This project started from a request to try and restore an old photograph from the Tucker family. After spending many hours repairing the image, I was curious to find the story behind the people, house and why it was taken. This substantial old home is often unnoticed as you drive out of Scottsdale up Ringarooma Road. It is hidden behind clumps of wattle trees growing up alongside Tucker's Creek. This land was once owned by Thomas Tucker in the 1860s, and he built a flour mill on the creek that bears his name. The mill was burnt down in 1886, but Lena, the house built in the same year, still survives. If we jump back in time 130 years, this is what the Ringarooma Road near North East Park looked like. The large building on the left is Mr. C.S. Button's Brewery and aerated waters factory. It was built in 1883. Taken about the same time, we can see Lenna, the house built for C.S. Button and his son Edmund. Note the young orchard and single-wire telegraph line alongside Ringarooma Road. It was erected in 1883. These views show the dense forest that once covered the Scottsdale area. The trees have been ring-barked and burnt to create space for farming and buildings. Charles Stammers Button arrived in Tasmania in 1828. After serving as a Launceston alderman and running the Brewery, he moved to Scottsdale in 1883 when he found the railway was coming to town. Charles purchased land from Thomas Tucker in 1882 and 1886. He built the brewery on the 1 acre block and the family home Lena on the 2 acre block next door. There is some confusion regarding the house, as the 2 acre block is in his son's name, and another newspaper article mentions Edward building a cottage there in 1886. The Launceston Examiner of February 1886 reported that the house was prettily situated next to a creek. Between 1883 and 1893, the Buttons brewed beer and made aerated waters. In the 1980s, the factory produced an average of 9,000 gallons of beer a year. In 1893, the brewery part was closed down, but still produced aerated waters. Many of the aerated water bottles have been found. The bottles were imported from England and filled at the Scottsdale factory. Rare bottles can fetch thousands of dollars. In the early 1900s, the factory was sold to Ernest Bowen, and a new 4-bedroom house was built in 1913. The plans for this house also show what each of the factory buildings were used for. Edmund's son Tasman remembers as a small boy climbing up the stairs to the upper floor and watching the mail coaches passing up and down Ringarooma Road, and the operation of Jimmy the Chinaman across the road. Jimmy had a market garden irrigated from the creek. He also had a couple of big black pigs. Jimmy would sell his fresh vegetables door to door, carrying 2 large baskets hung on the end of a long pole across his shoulders. Once the local larrikins upset his baskets, ruining the vegetables. Locals organised a collection to repay him for his losses. Between 1880 and the early 1900s, we know that some Chinese lived near Scottsdale. This photograph has always puzzled me, as it purports to show a Joss house at Scottsdale. No mention of the Joss house has been found in publications, but the mountain on the left-hand side of the photograph does resemble Mount Stronach. Maybe it did exist, just above North East Park on the Ringarooma Road. Charles Stammers Button died at his residence in St John Street, Launceston in 1907. He had been in ill health for some time. He was buried in the Charles Street Cemetery. Edmund Button was only a young man of 19 when he moved to Scottsdale with his sister Marion in 1883. The youthful Edmund Button worked very long hours. It was not unusual for him to turn out at 4 a.m. in the morning, winter and summer, and drive teams to various northeastern towns, delivering goods as far as Wilbur and Alberton. The roads were slab, corduroy logs and mud, and it was quite common to get bogged, arriving home at all hours of the night. This is a somewhat tragic scene of members of the Button and Tucker families celebrating some event in the garden at Lena. Judging by the fruit trees, it was probably autumn or winter. Edmund and his wife Fanny are on the right. This was probably taken only a few years before Fanny passed away. On the left is Nurse Holmes, Fanny's carer. In the centre is Charles Button, Louis and Arthur Tucker. The next few photographs show how the property has changed from the earlier days, when tall trees still covered much of the area, until the present day. The early photographs weren't dated, and I put them in order by looking at the trees growing near the house Lena. In the other photographs, I compared this group of trees. In October 1890, while still employed by his father, Edmund was elected member of the Scottsdale Fruit Board and from 1895 to 97 held the position of chairman. At that time, the codlin moth rate was 3 6 per acre. Edmund Button gave up the cordial business when he was appointed council clerk early in 1908. He also moved his family from Lena up to the town into the new home, Harrow that was built in Eleanor Street. Edmund Button took an active interest in public matters, being elected to many early Scottsdale organisations. In 1894, he became a member of the Mechanics' Institute. He acted as chairman from 1895 to 1902 and was re-elected president, a position his father had occupied before him. Edmund was a member of the North East Agriculture and Pastoral Society for a number of years. Edmund was elected a member of the town board in 1893, chairman in 1896, and he continued as a member until 1905. 2 years later, the board was absorbed by the newly created Municipal Council, and at the first election, Mr Button was returned as the representative of the town ward. At the first meeting, he was elected Warden, thus holding the honour of being the first Warden of the municipality. Continuing to live at Harrow in Eleanor Street, Edmund helped raise money for the proposed NESM hospital in Scottsdale. Edmund moved from councillor to the Scottsdale Council clerk from 1908 until 1934 when he retired. When the council was disbanded in 1938, Edmund served on the Scottsdale Council Commission. It is ironic that his service to local government led to his untimely death. When visiting Hobart to address the Municipal Association, he fell from a moving tram in Sandy Bay and never recovered. After Edmund's death in 1946, the property was sold, and Lena finally passed out of the hands of the Button family.